You know, while making these videos, I often ask myself, what would be a good topic? What is it that I'm interested in? What do I want to share with the world? And sometimes I discard ideas because they either don't seem to be big enough or I'm not invested enough to slave away weeks of my time making a video if I myself am not even that interested in it. But more often than not, I come across brilliant ideas or niche topics and then find out that there is already a much more comprehensive or more detailed overview than I could ever hope to give. There seemingly is nothing new I could bring to the table, so another dead end. Because of course I want to create something new, something original, something that hasn't existed in any form before and thus by pure virtue of its existence somehow magically enriches the world with its presence. At least that's how I subconsciously thought of the creative process. To not be a copy of a copy of a copy, one has to create something totally new. Isn't that the whole purpose of creating? But then I stopped myself. Was that all? Where does the value lie in creating? Is it just being original? And what does that even mean? The word original or origin itself comes from its Latin roots originalis or originis, declaring a source like a spring or roots in nature. Nature in this context can be seen as a well of newness and a frontier that encapsulates all things. It's a notion that's not only seen in the framework of creative and artistic work, but many aspects of our past. Through the ages, people have looked towards nature for inspiration or guidance in physical and spiritual ways. Nature is a muse. If you want to be original, you have to be the source, be the first one. To be novel then, to originate, means to be born out of nothingness. All newness has this attribute of nothingness because there is no predecessor. But when we look into our own workings, our history and ideas, we find that nowadays rarely anything we do, think or write is original in the classic sense. When we look hard enough, seemingly everything has been done, thought or written before. Everything has been done, thought or written. It seems like a very fatalistic approach. If we were to place the whole worth of our being in being novel or new, there seemingly would be no point in creating at all. So, to start dissecting the matter of originality and the worth of creating, we have to acknowledge that there is nothing truly quote-unquote original, that everything is made possible by what came before, inspired if only subconsciously by values and ideas that are imprinted on us from an early age, our surroundings and so on. To create from a point of pure novelty without influence would mean to create without the self. It would create a soulless work. One must look no further than AI-generated artworks, poetry or writing. A novelty? Sure, and yeah, the algorithm the AI works by had to be fed with other works to create this artificial reference for their own process. But it's true that it is original in the sense that these lines or words in this exact composition were never seen before. But is it good?
The fact that you are ugly is what makes you a failure.
Murder can be as pretty as a breath of fresh air of tomorrow.
We can make policemen beg for mercy.
A politician is the ghost of a friend on speed.
Every moment of your life can be an embrace made of kale.
So, if it's not just the aspect of being truly novel, what other things do we value in art and creating as a whole? Is it creativity in and of itself? In other words, does the act of creating have an inherent value? Or does this value we put on something only arise when we view it in a broader context, if worth is imposed on art from the outside? Art must be appreciated to be good. Art lies in the eyes of the beholder. All art is subjective. All these sayings seem to indicate that there are more things going on here than an intrinsic process that is wholly contained within a work. And creativity is a muddled term. Some interpret it as either just doing things, or they see creative as an analog to imaginative. And the imagination is what sets us apart from other species, the ability to marvel and to fantasize. Artists, writers and thinkers get praised for being original. It's a virtue, an ideal that is both elusive and unreachable. Originality in music is seen as especially important as far as intellectual property is concerned. And we only get capitalism to thank for the commercialization of ideas, of putting a stamp of ownership on something as fleeting as a thought. But does art have to be original to be good? In virtually all forms of art, there is the practice of using prior works of other artists in the same field as a case study. Studying the masters, or to name a more modern version specific to music, sampling. It's using previous iterations as a springboard to propel oneself forward, to develop your own ideas. Sometimes you start with a base that is totally unoriginal and then reiterate.
Yes, I have. And I think that's a really great thing to be able to do in composition, is take something and then change it into something else, as long as it's not too overtly the thing you listen. Yeah, and as long as it's not a rip-off.
Everybody does. I mean, you know, I know Tom used to as a songwriter. Like everybody takes bits, and you know, and it's how you reinterpret them, and it's you don't want to rip people off, but that's a part of. Everybody's always done that. Like there are chunks, there are blocks, there are harmonies, there are things. We all beg, borrow, and steal.
To acknowledge others' works is also to appreciate the effort and genuine hardship of creating that went into them. To discard everyone else's takes just to be purely original for most artists, and out of my own experience, is only a crutch. By being oblivious to or consciously disregarding others' processes, one puts themselves in artificial disadvantage. Why not learn from the ones that came before you?
Particularly in the writing process, like just don't worry about plagiarism or anything like that. Don't think, oh, I might get a lawsuit for this, because you can always, like if it leads to something good, you can always come back and take out the thing that's creating the copyright issue. I think if it inspires you, if it gets you going, run with it and then worry about the kind of practical stuff later.
I think there's nothing, is there anything really, really, really unique without, I can't think of. Yeah.
Not much, no. It's usually just the way that things are reconstituted and the vibe with which they're reconstituted.
Yeah.
The pitfall of true originality is a common concern when artists come to fame. There is more pressure to stand out, to not give anyone reason to accuse you of copying other artists. But on the flip side, the exposure can ease their restraints somewhat. Even though their work might be derivative, it can be seen as original purely because the brand name makes it more known than the original. But I don't want to get too deep into that here. Just one other thought in that direction. Just because something is famous or a famous artist doesn't mean it's a good work, at least not when you place the worth of the art in the observer, who ideally isn't fazed by the hype. Fame doesn't equate to good quality. Conversely, the algorithm on YouTube hides or highlights certain pieces of work, giving or withholding deserved or undeserved recognition. Going off on a little tangent here, let's talk memes for a moment. As a whole, they aren't exactly original. At times they can be highly derivative with their templates and formats, but we still get entertained. The continuity and constant little changes to familiar concepts is what hooks us. We're deriving enjoyment from this sense of familiarity, from this connection we have to the content. And we can only have that connection if what is presented to us already exists in some form. They represent a collaborative experience, which is an alternative to originality in my opinion. I want to point out one specific example before we move on. The meme, "You are the first one to witness," or the first in the world to see this, that mocks this pure novelty aspect of originality. In its classic meme style, it slaps us in the face with non sequitur, a random sequence or combination of items and events that are weirdly reminiscent of cursed images in a kind of video format. Lessons in Meme Culture made an excellent dissection of the format. Let's hear what he has to say about it.
Being the first to witness bizarre acts online is a normal rite of passage. Perhaps you've seen some interesting things happen to a jar, or perhaps you'll never look at cups the same way again. However, I bet you've never seen a bell pepper injected with chocolate milk at 400 feet, or a particular brand of video camera completely submerged in honey mustard sauce. In what appears to be a trend created, or at least popularized by, Scuba Steve from early October this year, one can become the first to witness a wide range of unseen acts. Of course, watching stuff get dipped in paint or having utterly banal items being combined in unexpected ways in order to make an exciting video is not new. It's a bit like the modern equivalent of the Will It Blend series from the early 2000s, in which everyday items are made exciting simply through process of destruction. However, the key difference here being that the Blender videos lack the user engagement provided by comments like "Eric did this first," ensuring this newer iteration of item destruction receives greater accessibility. By taking part in more than one seemingly abstract activity appearing devoid of reason, millions of people are able to feel as if they belong to a certain trend and tickle that part of the brain that craves social interaction. Not only that, but Y'all Are the First to Witness videos are simple to construct. Throwing the latest iPhone into a blender is not something anyone can do, but the everyday person can find some random household objects and create a masterpiece with a little creativity.
To return to the subject of originality, let's examine the roots of this idea that the attempt at being completely original is futile. And like many things, we find the origins to be connected to the Bible and Christianity. Nihil sub sole novum, nothing new under the sun. I'm sure some of you may have heard that phrase before. It has its origins in the book of Ecclesiastes 1:9. That which has been is that which will be again, and that which has been done is that which will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. I actually found a video on this by a channel called Speak Life.
We've got plenty of sayings like this. History repeats itself. Same old, same old. What goes around comes around. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Anyone who lives long enough will observe a relentless circularity to life. That was certainly the teacher's experience in Ecclesiastes, and it bred in him a desperate world weariness. Let me read from chapter 1 and verse 3. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. This is life under the sun, not life above the sun, not the life of heaven. This is life as though the here and now is all there is. And the teacher is thoroughly bored of it all.
He keeps talking a bit about how the excerpt is a representation of Solomon's earthly side, about how this futility is applicable only if we consider the here and now, not the afterlife. With time, the inescapable circularity to life becomes apparent. It's ultimately a futile repetition, and this brings me back to the myth of Sisyphus. And this makes the question of how to react to that futility all the more interesting. If we go with Camus' example, we can either resign ourselves, stop creating and thus destroying the cycle, which would be akin to a kind of intellectual suicide, or third, create anyway in the full knowledge of being derivative. Another way to describe it can be found in Donna Tartt's novel, The Secret History. Nihil sub sole novum, I thought as I walked back down the hall to my room. Any action in the fullness of time sinks into nothingness. And of course, this idea of repetition and the cyclical nature bleeds into the concept of infinity. To borrow a concept from an earlier video, consider the Library of Babel. If you are interested, I'll link the website where you can experience the library in the comments. Everything you could ever write or think or experience in a form that can be written down already exists somewhere in the confines of these hexagons. You can look it up, it's right there. If we were to limit ourselves to these 410 pages, there would truly be nothing new under the sun as far as writing is concerned. But that seems a bit unfair. After all, ultimately what the Library of Babel comes down to is a pure game of chance. It's nothing more and nothing less than cold math, calculations. That's not what you think of when you think of creativity, is it? The same principle of non-endless possibilities applies to passwords or anything limited by a certain threshold in size. After a while, everything becomes just an act of repurposing and rearranging. Has all creating then lost its purpose? By the way, Vsauce made a video on this a few years back about when we'll run out of new passwords.
I searched for what I've just said, and sure enough, in this hexagon, on this wall, this shelf, in this volume, on this page, it's there. Hello. But deep down, we feel like there's a difference between this program permuting something unknowingly and a person actually meaning it, intending it, saying it because they wanted to with agency.
Me pregunto qué me dirías si pudieras hablar.
When I met you in the summer.
When you're studying a field, there's this tendency, especially in the humanities, the liberal arts, for students to, and I understand this very well because I got caught up in it myself, for students to kind of think that they have to come up with something new or else what they're doing is valueless. And, you know, let's distinguish from the start, you know, unoriginality in the sense of just merely copying what somebody else is doing, you know, mechanically, without actually putting anything of your own mind or thought or understanding with it, without grappling with it. You know, the kind of stuff that people do when they cut and paste from Spark Notes or Wikipedia, or even, you know, from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy or the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, you know, reputable, peer-reviewed sources. If you're not actually wrapping your own head around it and digesting it and reflecting on it and making it your own, then I guess you can say what you're doing is totally unoriginal, right? But then you're probably doing something akin to plagiarizing, which is just presenting somebody else's thoughts and work and articulation as your own.
This is Professor Gregory B. Sadler. He's uploading videos to YouTube on a wide range of philosophical topics. In this one, he discusses the meaning of being original in the context of both students and people that are holding an academic profession. Originality, how we perceive it, is a very modern concept. In ancient and medieval times, even up to the early stages of the Enlightenment movement, the field of studying, creating, and learning as a whole was an extremely reiterative process. True originality, then, was to integrate and assimilate old concepts, often arriving at the same answers, like Professor Sadler put it. It was never about transcending all what came before, leaving it aside. The pinnacle of study and creation, therefore, was to find a balance between the novel and the pre-established. This becomes increasingly difficult as time goes on. The balance skews towards the mountain of original work that came before you, and it becomes exceedingly hard to find any new aspects to explore. This not only extends into the realm of academic study, but standard forms of art like non-academic writing and visual arts too, where it's hard to avoid the pitfalls of tropes and cliches. I'd like to show another clip from Professor Sadler here, where he talks about his original but not concept, albeit in the context of philosophical work.
A lot of what you're doing is not original in the sense that nobody else has ever done it, but it's original in the sense that you haven't done it. It's new to you. And that progress, that process, that work, that effort that you're making to understand something that you didn't understand before, or to make a little bit more, to go the next step in understanding things, to bring in a few more things into the constellation of concepts that you're working with, that really is valuable. That is worthwhile. That is what it is to be involved in perennial philosophy.
Sadler offers us a new option here about how to interpret what originality is. It can be either new content or a new aspect or your own way to see the content. It's difficult to be truly novel in fields like history. You can't just invent your own timeline of what happened in the past. As time passes, you work with new events, new content, so to speak. In the meantime, all you can do in these fields of work is to view them through your individual lens. Sometimes it's impossible to check if your idea or your work is truly something that has never existed before, if somewhere, sometime, someone maybe had this idea before or did something similar to what you are attempting at this moment. But that doesn't devalue your effort to challenge yourself, to grow. I think it's meaningless to be obsessed with pure novelty. It's to strike a balance between the known and unknown, to inspire and incite the mind. Ultimately, it won't matter if what you did was original in a sense. It's important that you did it, and did so with a purpose. We think of what we create, be it literature, art, any kind of influence we have, as our legacy. We're concerned with what we're gonna leave behind, in a way a justification or proof of our existence. And while that may be a toxic way to think about yourself, if we entertain that thought for a moment, we can come to an interesting conclusion. This fear of unoriginality, this existential dread really, can be attributed to people thinking the value of the person lies in the product. If the product is mediocre, unoriginal, uninspiring, what does it say about the person? And I won't go into a tangent about how capitalistic ideas shape our perception of worth and self-achievement. If you're interested in that, I think there are enough people out there that are not me who are talking about this. Concerning the arts, people really put their soul into their works. They put some part of themselves onto the paper. We are back at the prospect of soulful and soulless works. Generally, if there is something personal to the artist contained in their work, in other words, if they create it with passion, it will have a greater impact. People fear if they aren't original, or dare say derivative, that they lose the sense of personal closeness or connection to a work, the sense of you-ness that is essentially in everything you create. But especially in the art world, be it professional or not, it's a well-accepted notion that to be a good painter, sculptor, craftsman and so on, you have to learn to steal like an artist. Studying the greats, like previously mentioned, is only one part of that. It's inevitable to be influenced by the content you consume. That's even more true for people striving for creating art. You have to look with the eyes of an artist, observe and dissect your surroundings, distill meaning out of the ordinary. Getting influences from other artists, taking certain traits to propel forward one's own craft, there is no shame in that. There is a clear difference between taking inspiration and learning from others and blatant copying, plagiarism, the theft of intellectual property. And that's ultimately an interesting thing to consider, that we decided to put value on not only material things, but also the realm of the intangible.
We use a finite number of symbols to say things. For that reason, a library of every finite combination of those symbols can be made. But just because it can be made doesn't mean it has been said. That is the power we have. Perhaps you and I were born too late to explore the world and too early in history to explore the stars, but we were born at just the right time, which is pretty much all times ever, to explore language, to explore what can be said. And as always,
thanks for watching.
So that was about everything I had to say on the subject. If you got your own ideas on what being original truly means, feel free to share your opinions down below. We'll see each other in the next video. Bye!